Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Schwartz. This is Lead Talks, where we talk to instructors from the San Diego, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino area. And it's an opportunity for you to get to know more instructors. If you're the type of person that trains a lot, then this is a good opportunity for you to find someone new to train with. If you're someone that doesn't really train much or hasn't trained at all with someone professionally, well, then this is a great opportunity for you to meet an instructor that you may want to train with. They all have their own special techniques and philosophies. And so Lead Talks is every Monday night at 7 p.m. thanks to Gun Owners Radio. And it's on Gun Owners Radio's Facebook, X, and Facebook, X, and what am I missing? Facebook, X, and YouTube. So that's how you see us live. Totally free. Like I said, every Monday at 7, and of course, listen to us on 1170 a.m. or on youtube.com/gun owners radio every Sunday from 4 to 6. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dakota Adelphia. Dakota she does a lot of things, but one of the things I think I know her best is she leads the local A Girl and a Gun, which is a fantastic organization and project that she's going to tell you about. And today her talk is all things concealment, which she is absolutely one of the most knowledgeable people I know on the subject. So thank you, Dakota. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'll just kind of start off by saying if at any point anyone has any questions, please feel free to comment those, and Michael's going to feed them to me throughout the lecture. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. But my
Very
name's
good.
Dakota Adelphia. I think the thing I'm probably most known for is A Girl and a Gun and running the San Diego chapter of that. I am a local firearms instructor in other capacities as well. I teach the CCW classes for San Diego County Sheriffs, and I do some other kind of private lessons and things like that. But I am a huge advocate for concealing your gun comfortably and concealing it well. And one of the main reasons I want you to have comfortable concealment is because I know you'll leave your gun at home if you're not getting concealed comfortably, right? A lot of folks, they have struggled with different holster options, or they've struggled with different size carry guns, and they're finding, they're having printing problems, and they're also uncomfortable. And then more often than not, they end up leaving their gun at home. But I really want you to carry a gun if you want to carry a gun. And so I want to help you do that by helping you get comfortable concealment and answering any questions that you have on that topic. So just to do kind of a quick thing about A Girl and a Gun in the San Diego chapter, if you are a woman who is on any part of their shooting journey, so you could be, so new that you've never touched a gun in your life, or working on competition shooting and wanting to improve your competitive skills, we do all sorts of seminars and classes for that whole range of shooters. We are women led, so it's for women by women. All of the instructors that you interact with at our events and range safety officers are all ladies. But we do sometimes bring in instructors outside to come in and teach a class. So I sometimes host other folks. I'm going to be hosting Melody Lauer for her 2-day Armed Guardian class later this fall. And then I'll also be hosting Ed Monk for his active shooter class in November, early November. So we bring in folks from all across the country to teach certain topics, and those are generally going to be co-ed classes. So we do offer some co-ed stuff, but mostly it's for women by women. You can learn more about A Girl and a Gun by going to our website. So it's www.agirlandagun.org. And then you can find the San Diego chapter from there. That's also probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. So if you go to agirlandagun.org and find the San Diego chapter, it'll have my email address and my work phone number as well. So if you have any follow-up questions after tonight, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer questions. If you have a question specifically related to concealment, I will ask that you send in a photo of you with your gun on you so that I can actually kind of analyze what the issue is. It's really hard when folks are describing the issue in words. So if you send me a few pictures, maybe a front view and a side view, I'm happy to take a look and give you tips and feedback from there. If you are curious about my background at all, I'll just do a really short intro to that. So, I didn't grow up around guns. I grew up in a pretty anti gun place just outside of Chicago. So, it's not super gun friendly there, even though a lot of not good guys do have guns in that area. But when I came to college in San Diego, I just kind of discovered for the first time that I was not able to defend myself if something were to happen. And I just became very aware of that fact that I had, no martial arts skills. I didn't have any training with a firearm or other tools that I could use in self defense. And so I started to just kind of think about kind of home defense. I lived in an apartment close to campus where there were break-ins and things, and I just started thinking, what would I do if somebody came in my house, or what do I want to learn so that I feel more in control of my own safety? And so that kind of started me down the path of getting my first gun. So I looked up local training opportunities in San Diego, and I found the San Diego chapter of A Girl and a Gun. And that's how my journey started. So it was at the time being run by a woman named Judy Wells, and she became a mentor to me and taught me a lot about shooting, and also encouraged me to go outside of our kind of small community here in San Diego and to travel to different nationally recognized instructors and take classes from different folks across the country. So I started, training with different people. And now I have, some NRA certificates, but I also am a range master certified pistol instructor. I've gone through Masad Ayoub's deadly force instructor. I've done image-based decision drills with Brian and Shelley Hill, the complete combatant, and I'm also an OC spray instructor through Chuck Haggard. So I've gotten, quite a few different types of styles of teaching, and that is kind of what molded my own teaching style, was taking classes from a bunch of different folks and figuring out how I learned best, and then also how I saw other students responding to the information. So I would really highly encourage you, if you have a local instructor that you love working with, that is awesome. Definitely get as much information out of them as you can, but also go out and explore a little bit. There are so many good ways to get, your bang for your buck, and one of those is conferences. So if you can find a firearms conference like TACCon, which is run by Rangemaster, there's the Guardian conference that's run by Riley Bowman's company. I think it's concealedcarry.com. The A Girl and a Gun national conference is only open to women, but that's also a fantastic place to go for some additional training. And one of the benefits of that setting for learning is that you get all these different instructors in one place. And so you get to kind of sample who you might want to take a full weekend class from. So I really highly recommend, getting out of our San Diego bubble and go out and train with some other folks across the country. I also work for a company called Filster Holsters. You might recognize me from some of their social media stuff. I'm a content moderator for them on their Facebook group, which is called the Filster Concealment Workshop on Facebook. We've got about 35,000 members in there asking us questions about concealment. So that's what I do. I look at their photos and I give them feedback on how they could conceal their guns better. I also do some curriculum development work for them. But I do just want to give the caveat that I am not here on behalf of Filster Holsters, and I am not speaking on their behalf at all. So all of the opinions I'm going to talk about tonight are my own. I am going to do some demonstrations in a little bit with one of their holster systems called the Enigma. So I will be using the Enigma for my demonstration, but I'm not on their sales team. I don't get paid to pitch the Enigma. It's just what I actually use every day to carry my gun. So it's what I'm going to kind of talk through with you guys. But I talk a lot about concealment, comfort, concealed carry safety, and all of those are things that Filster has resources on. So I will be sharing some resources with you guys that you can check out after this. But just wanted to be clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of them. So we're going to start by chatting a little bit about choosing safe holsters. This is kind of the first step to a good system that is going to work with your body, is making sure it's safe. The last thing we want to do is choose a holster and then figure out, weeks from now that you've been carrying in a configuration where you could accidentally shoot yourself throughout the day, right? That's like the very last thing we want. So there's a few different ways to kind of test that out, but I just want to start with this caveat. So unfortunately, there are a lot of predatory ads out there, a lot of predatory marketing that makes it look like a holster is a really safe option when it isn't. And it is at the buyer's own discretion to make sure that they are vetting the product and make sure that it is safe to use. So just because they sell it online, or just because you saw a Facebook ad with a bunch of probably fake reviews, does not mean it's actually a safe system to use, and you could seriously injure yourself or someone else. So make sure you're doing your own due diligence and checking that your holster is actually a safe solution for you. I truly think this just comes from a lack of kind of accountability in the firearms industry. And it's not your fault if you fell prey to one of these ads. So, don't let anyone tell you they don't have a drawer full of junk holsters. I've got a whole drawer of my dresser that's full of holsters that are not safe, not good options that I would never buy again. But I didn't know when I was first starting out on my concealment journey. So, don't be embarrassed if you have to go online and buy another holster after this class. I just want everybody to know that everyone has some holsters that they had to throw away. So don't fret. So really the main things we want to think about when we're thinking about safe holsters are, is the trigger fully protected? When I say fully protected, I mean that there's absolutely no chance that anything on the outside could compress the trigger while the gun is in the holster. So for example, if I could see any portion of the holster, of the trigger, I mean, through this holster, that would be an unsafe option that I would not want to use. I want that trigger to be fully covered. And a lot of people will think like, why, right? So we have all sorts of news stories that share all sorts of information, but dogs' paws can, if a dog jumps on you, that can compress a trigger. I recently read one about a lady who leaned over a chain link fence, and she was using kind of a stretchy belly band material that didn't have any hard Kydex trigger protection. And that belly band was thin enough that the chain link actually entered the trigger guard and pressed the trigger into her abdomen while she leaned over. So these are things that happen in real life. I saw one where it was the corner of a desk or a table. The corner of the table was just kind of the perfect shape. Someone bumped into it and the trigger got pressed and fired into the floor. So these are things that happen. You can, look online, find stories of people who are carrying guns while they go off by themselves. Almost all the time when a gun goes off by itself, it's actually having the trigger compressed with something. Another really common one is drawstrings or zipper, the little tassels on the end of a zipper. If you are holstering your gun while it's loaded, maybe you're, working at the range, right? You're getting some reps in and you're holstering your gun. If you're not watching that gun go into the holster and making sure that there's nothing in the way, it is possible for a drawstring or a tassel to get into that trigger guard. And as you push the gun down into the holster, that tension can actually compress the trigger and cause it to fire. So we really want to be careful when we're choosing these holsters because, we're carrying a gun for it to be life-saving gear, something that could allow me to take my own, safety and protection into my hands, right? But that point is kind of null if I'm carrying in a way where I might actually cause harm to my own body. I might actually be the thing that, shoots my leg and causes a massive bleed that I can't recover from, or that I end up passing away from. And that has happened in some of these stories where folks have been shot in the leg, and it's very, very quick to bleed out when you hit a femoral artery, right? So we just want to be very mindful of how important safety is and really be focused on safety as our first priority when we're choosing a holster. All right, so that's the first rule, right? We want the trigger to be fully protected and nothing can get to it from the outside. So that's usually going to rule out our belly band options or our flexible like shorts or even those tank tops where you put the gun in the pocket underneath your arm. There are ways to make those options safe, like putting the gun into a Kydex holster, like a thin Kydex holster, and then Velcroing the holster into the pocket. That would definitely meet that trigger safety requirement. But we definitely don't want to just be putting a gun into a flexible or fabric pocket and calling it a good day, because that is definitely a recipe for disaster. So that leads us into the second thing, which is that we want our holster to retain the firearm. If the firearm is at risk of falling out from everyday movements like walking, or let's say, your dog gets out and you have to jog across the street or sprint across the street, is your gun at risk of completely coming out of the holster and falling to the ground? So if you can't move your gun at all when it's in the holster attached to your body, if your gun stays firmly seated when you pull up on it, that's great. You want your gun to be retained. I like audible retention. That means that you actually hear a clicking sound when your gun goes in all the way. There are some options out there that have adjustable retention. So adjustable retention would mean that there's a screw or a lever where you can twist the screw to actually get the holster to tighten on the gun. If you have an adjustable retention holster, you're going to want to make sure that you have that screw tightened. And then this is the important part, that you witness mark the screw. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, I would tighten it as tight as you want to get it, and then draw a line on the screw and on the body of the holster, either with like a Sharpie, or you could use like a screwdriver and kind of etch a line into it. The reason for that is if that screw starts to back out, if it starts to twist, all of a sudden you'll see that your witness mark on the screw is going sideways, but your line on your holster is going straight down. And then you'll know that your screw is starting to come loose and that your adjustable retention probably isn't as tight as it needs to be. So make sure after you get that perfect amount of retention that you're witness marking your screws so that you're not accidentally losing retention without realizing it. Eric is asking if I have used a Tolster holster. I have used Tolster before, not very much, so I don't really have much of an opinion on their products, but I actually was gifted a Tolster holster from a student. So I have it. I think it's still in my drawer, but I'm not familiar with their whole product line. I don't even think I've ever been on their website. So I probably don't have much to add for you on that brand. But I will say some general kind of brand recommendations that I have for good inside the waistband concealed carry holsters. I work for Filster, so obviously I'm a fan of them, but I'm also a fan of Henry holsters, JM Custom Kydex. They have a lot of unique guns on their list. So if you have kind of a strange gun, they probably have a really good inside the waistband concealment option for you. There's some other brands out there. KSG Armory is good. I think Haven Defense has some good holsters. So there's a lot of good companies out there, but for the most part, I would stay away from companies that seem too good to be true, or too affordable. A lot of times it is too good to be true, and they are affordable because they're being made with not as robust materials. So if you do have a cheap holster or a holster that kind of seems like it might be not the best quality, that's totally fine, but just make sure that you're checking it on a regular basis. You want to look for any sorts of cracks or any signs of wear around the screws. I've actually seen a holster fail where the entire Kydex portion that was protecting the trigger guard, so like this entire piece here cracked all the way down to the screws and just fell off. So the person heard a crack in their pants while they were carrying the gun and looked down and realized that their whole trigger was exposed and there were pieces of Kydex just kind of free floating in their pants. So definitely make sure that you're checking for signs of wear and tear and cracking and replacing your life-saving gear before it fails on you. All right. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them in there. I'm happy to take them as we go. So we've talked about fully protecting the trigger. We've talked about retaining the gun and making sure that you know that gun is retained. And then the next one is we want to make sure the holster itself is being retained to you. So it's great if the gun is in the holster, but what if the whole holster just comes off of your belt? You know, we still have the same problem, no gun or a gun on the floor, right? So when we're thinking about good, solid construction of holsters and clips, we want to think about solutions that are going to retain themselves to your belt very well. One of the companies that makes very strong metal clips is Discreet Carry Concepts. They have a great clip. They have the Mod 4 and the Mod, they have a bunch of mods, but Mod 4 and Mod 5 are very popular. And those clips are very challenging to get onto your belt. And that's a good thing because it means it's challenging for it to come off, right? If your clip is made out of plastic or if it's starting to deform and open up a little bit, and you find it's getting really easy to put it on your belt, I would probably look at switching out that clip and getting a new one that has a little bit of firmer retention. Another thing that I see sometimes with different types of carry systems, especially if it isn't a belt mounted holster, there are a lot of products out there that advertise that you can attach it directly to the fabric of your pants. So if you're wearing something like jeans, for example, the fabric of your pants probably has enough structure to hold the gun upright. But if you're wearing something flimsier like gym shorts or leggings or something that just doesn't have as much durability, it maybe the clip itself will hang on to the fabric just fine. But I've seen plenty of times where the whole entire gun and holster want to flip out of the belt line and hang upside down because the fabric itself isn't strong enough to hold the gun to your body. So as you move around or do a jumping jack or sprint across the street, it's easy for that weight to shift towards the top of the gun and the gun to just kind of fall upside down on the outside of your pants. So we definitely want to make sure that we're testing our retention on our holster. Another good option is like pull the dot loops. So these loops go through your belt and then they have very, very firm snaps. They're actually so firm that some people will be like, I can't even get them undone, but there is a method to how to get them undone that works very well. So you just watch a video or two on it and make sure you understand how they work. But they will give you really good retention to your belt. Another method, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit here in a minute, is something like the Enigma system, where it's a belt that goes around your body instead of having to wear clothing that requires a belt, like jeans with belt loops. So there's a lot of different options that are kind of that concept where the system goes underneath your clothing. There's belly band options out there that do have full Kydex holsters in the pockets that make them safe. So those are a good option. But when we're thinking about retention for those under the clothes options, we want to make sure that we feel very good about whatever system is fastening the two ends together. So in the case of the Enigma, the fastener of the two ends is this magnetic fidlock buckle. So this buckle is very sturdy. It only comes undone if you pull this. It's a magnet in there. So I feel very secure about this attachment system. A lot of the belly bands will have Velcro. When you first get one, it may not have as much Velcro as you feel comfortable with. I've seen them where they're just like a very thin strip of Velcro on the edge, and it would be easy to get that edge kind of caught on something or caught on your shirt and have the whole Velcro break away, and now the system is just going to fall off your body. So maybe putting a strip of Velcro horizontally all the way around so that once you put the belly band on, you have Velcro all the way around your body, keeping that kind of second layer of the wrap contained. So we just want to make sure that we're really being thorough when we're thinking about, does my system provide the right amount of retention? The next thing we want to think about is the ability to reholster our gun safely. So, for any sort of holster system that you're using, one of the mandatory things is that when you put your gun away, you don't have to point your gun at yourself. Um, I see folks doing this by holding onto the holster. So maybe they'll have their hand here and now they're bringing their gun in and they're totally muzzling their other hand. I see it happen sometimes where people have a system that sits really high, maybe like a belly band. And when they're holstering the gun's kind of pointing in towards their abdomen, towards their back. I've also seen where folks are carrying on strong side and they have their leg really wide. So if you're carrying strong side and you're going to reholster, you don't want your leg further out than the muzzle of your gun. You want to bring your feet together, push your hip out so that the muzzle of the gun can stay pointed away from your leg the whole time that it's going into the holster. One of the problems with any sort of holster that has a collapsible mouth, so that would be like a sticky holster or one of the fabric pockets in a belly band. If the pocket itself closes when you take the gun out, it's going to be very difficult to reholster without using one hand to open the pocket and then the other hand to holster the gun. A lot of times when you have to open the pocket with your support hand, it becomes very easy to muzzle your fingers. There are ways to do it safely, and I have seen some collapsible holsters that have good, trigger guard coverage and they meet the requirements of a safe holster. So there are ways to do it, but it's just something we really want to be mindful of. I watch a ton of videos of people, working on their concealment and doing dry fire practice. And I see a lot of guns crossing their legs or their abdomen, or their hip area as they're reholstering. So we just want to be very cautious of that and pay a lot of attention, because reholstering is one of the most dangerous things that we're doing when we're practicing at the range with a holster. So that's where a lot of negligent discharges actually occur, because people are holstering quickly or not looking to make sure there's no obstructions in the holster. So definitely recommend that you are very cautious when you're reholstering. You always want to look, make sure that holster is clear and empty, and watch your gun go into the holster nice and slow. There's not a rush to put the gun away, right? We want to be fast when we're drawing the gun, but we can take our time, take a breath, especially in a training environment, right? Take a breath, watch your gun go into that holster nice and slow, so that you're confident that the trigger is not going to be pressed during that process. All right, so a kind of bonus thing that isn't a requirement but is a helpful thing is if your holster is allowed to be used at the range. So I really like choosing gear that I can practice with, and I want to be able to practice with it in live fire. So if you're using any sort of system that is under the arm, like a shoulder holster situation or like ankle carry, things like that, most ranges are going to have an issue with you using that method on the line. If you're carrying, behind your hip, a lot of times it's very hard to draw your gun without having it pointing behind you or even to your right. And if you're on a firing line with other shooters, now your muzzle is pointed in an unsafe direction. So a lot of ranges won't allow those types of options. There are a lot of ranges out there that allow drawing from strong side and drawing from appendix. So those are kind of the two positions that I generally recommend folks go to, especially because you get that opportunity to practice live. If you go to a range that doesn't allow any work from the holster, definitely look around, because there are options in San Diego County that will allow it. And there are also ranges that make exceptions for classes. So, you might just have to find an instructor who's teaching a concealment class or teaching a holster class so that you can go and actually practice with the gear that you have. All right, so moving out of kind of holster safety stuff. So if anyone has a question about any of the safety stuff, go ahead and feel free to send those. What we're going to kind of be moving into next is concealment. So I'm going to just keep an eye out here for some questions. All right, tips or tricks to making dry fire easier and safer. Ooh, I love this question. This is a good one. So, one of the main things I would recommend is having a specific process that you do every single time you dry fire. So, for me, that is putting my phone on silent, putting my phone away from me so I can't get distracted by a phone call or anything like that. I unload my gun if I'm going to be dry firing with my carry gun. I unload my gun in a very specific direction of my home that is the very safest place for me to point a loaded gun inside my house. I have a big bookcase with a bunch of books. Books are very good at stopping rounds. So I do the unloading pointing at my bookcase. Once my gun is completely unloaded and I have confirmed that, I will leave it there by the bookcase on my desk, and I will take all the ammo, the magazine, the round that came out of the chamber, and I will put those in a different room. So I do not have any ammunition near my dry fire space. If I have any like boxes of ammo or loaded magazines, those all go in the other room. Once I have confirmed my area is sterile of ammunition and I've checked my pockets twice, then I will double check that that gun is unloaded by looking in that magazine well, looking in the chamber, and then my first dry fire press is always going to be into that bookcase. Because if for some reason my eyes were being dumb and my brain told me that there wasn't anything in the chamber, even though there was, I want that first round, the one that goes off, to be in the safest possible direction of my house. So I'm never ever going to unload my gun and willy-nilly press the trigger into a random wall, where I have neighbors on the other side or a bedroom on the other side. I'm always going to do that kind of sterilizing process because for me, I handle loaded guns a lot. I'm on and off the range a lot. I just felt like the risk of me getting complacent was pretty high because I do administratively handle guns so often. So for me, that looked like a very specific sterilization process. And then once I'm happy with the condition of my gun, I like chamber flags or barrel blocks. You can buy a barrel block on concealedcarry.com. It's basically just going to stick out the end of the barrel like a orange, an inch or so of orange at the end. It still lets you holster your gun without impacting your holster ability. So you can still work from the holster, but it's just this visual reminder that the gun is completely empty. So yeah, I'll do all of that first. And then after I've done that first trigger press, I am going to do my dry fire routine, whatever I'm working on for that session. And then when I'm ready to reload my gun, I will say out loud, I am done dry firing. I think it's really important for us to take that extra precaution because there are some stories and news articles out there of folks who were dry firing and then reloaded their gun. And then for whatever reason in their head, they were like, oh, I should take one more dry fire press, one more perfect dry fire press. And then the gun's loaded when they press the trigger. So just to kind of keep myself accountable, I go through that process every time that I am dry firing. I do try to dry fire a good amount. 2-ish times a week is my goal. I don't always get there, but just something to be mindful of. If you have the capacity to have a separate gun that stays unloaded, that's your dry fire gun, that's awesome because that's just minimizing your risk even more. But if you have to, if you only have one gun that you want to practice with, then make sure you're doing that in the safest possible way. I think that answered the question about making dry fire safer. As far as making dry fire easy, I will recommend a book. Actually, I have it right here, so I'll just grab it. This is a great book called Refinement and Repetition by Steve Anderson that goes through dry fire, all sorts of dry fire drills. So it gives you a drill, it gives you a way to track your results, and it's really, really helpful for dry fire practice. And you can, work through it over the course of a year or even 2 years. It's got a lot of drills in there, and just kind of track your progress and see how it's going. So I like kind of guided practice because if I just come into it with my own thing, sometimes I lose focus or it's not as productive as it could have been. And I feel like I wasted time. So All right, lots of questions here. So someone's asking 9 mil or 45. So I personally carry a Glock 19, which is chambered in 9 mil. I sometimes carry a SIG P365 XL, also chambered in 9 mil. I'm not against 45s. I just don't really shoot a lot of 45. AR or AK. I am more of an AR girl, but I'm not opposed to an AK either. Mossberg 500 or Remington 870. That's a tough one. Those are both great options. I actually was just shooting a pump action shotgun yesterday. I have a Winchester SXP because it was a gift, and I am not going to say no to a free gun. So it's a good pump action. It's not quite the Mossberg or the Remington, but very good option for home defense. I'm a huge fan of tactical shotgun competition. I think it's a lot of fun. And Rainbow Range up in Fallbrook actually has one. A component of their pistol competition every month has a shotgun stage and a shotgun team game. So it's a lot of fun if you guys like shotgun shooting. I think it's only like 25 or 50 shells a shotgun, 25, I think. And so it's a lot of fun. And I recommend that match. It's the second Saturday of every month. I hope that answered the questions enough. All right, so we're going to get into the concept of printing and concealment. So when we're talking about printing, we're really just talking about the shape of a gun under your clothes, right? So it doesn't have to be obvious it's a gun, but it's obvious that there's something there, and we don't want people to take that second glance or to really stare at it to try to figure out what it is, right? So I do whatever I can to eliminate any sort of printing so that I'm not going to the grocery store concerned that people are noticing. Sometimes people say, who cares if people notice? For me personally, I care because I think that some criminals who, have grown up their whole life around guns, they know how to look for guns. That's part of what they do to survive, right? Is to know who's carrying a gun and who isn't. A criminal might see me. I'm not a big woman, right? I'm a pretty small girl. A criminal might see me, notice I have a gun, and think, I like my odds against her. I like my odds of getting that gun for free. And I just want to avoid that potential. You can go to Active Self Protection on YouTube or just kind of look around on YouTube for gun grabs and gun thefts on body, concealed carry, gun grabs. They happen pretty often. And a lot of times they're violent. It's not someone sneaking up behind you and grabbing your gun and running. A lot of times they're coming up behind you, hitting you over the head. When you fall down, they're taking your gun and leaving. So I want to avoid that whole potential. And then also to avoid the potential that some random person at the grocery store is going to, take offense at the fact that I'm carrying a gun and start a confrontation or, call the police and have it become a fiasco that wasn't necessary if I had just concealed my gun a little bit better. So I like the concept of me being the only one who knows I have a gun. And if someone else is around that is seeing me, hopefully they don't see any signs that I'm carrying a gun. They don't see clips outside of my pants. They don't see the printing of the gun. And that's kind of my personal standard for myself. Everyone has different standards for concealment. So I want to help you get whatever level of concealment you're comfortable with. You don't have to have the same standard as me. A lot of times when we live in a place where guns aren't as commonplace, we have to be a little bit more careful and focus on concealment. So that's kind of the path that I fall into because I live in San Diego, and I know a lot of people who are not gun friendly, and a lot of people that I know don't even know that I'm in the firearms industry or that I carry a gun. So I like to keep it that way personally. So how do we get good concealment? I'm going to stand up and I'm going to put my Enigma on and kind of talk you guys through some concepts, but I will keep an eye on the chat. If there's any questions, feel free to throw those in there. So one of the first things that everyone can do when they are figuring out where they should carry a gun is they can look down on their body from the top. So what that's going to do is I'm just going to move the gun over so you guys can see. If I look down on my body, I can see that the peak of my body is right here near my belly button. On both sides of that peak, I have little valleys. So we're just looking at the landscape of our abdomen, of our concealment space. So for me, if I put a gun dead center on the top of my stomach, that is going to print the very most because that is my peak. It's my peak in this direction, and it's also my peak in this direction. I have a flatter spot here and a flatter spot here than I do right here in the middle. So I want to find kind of a valley where I can nestle my gun. So for me, my best valley is going to be just to the right of my belly button and a little bit lower than my belly button. So right here is kind of the best spot for me to conceal my gun. Now, this is very dependent on body type. Everyone's body is going to have a different concealment sweet spot. For some folks, it might be dead center in the middle of their belly, while for others, it will be more like how mine is right here, where it is off center towards the right side a little bit. I'm also right-handed, so this is towards my strong side. The next thing we want to do is we want to consider whether or not our gun is taking up more than our concealment sweet spot. So for me, my sweet spot is right here in this valley, but this gun is a little bit long for my torso. You know, my hip to hip distance is, you know, from here to here. So this gun is probably taking up about 40, maybe even 45% of my hip to hip distance. Anything over 40% is going to be a little bit challenging. I carry a Glock 19 a lot. That's my main carry gun. And that gun is about 53% of my hip to hip distance. So that is a very challenging gun to conceal. And that's on my frame. So for you, what you could do to figure out that same thing, that percentage, is to measure the distance between your hip bones and then measure from the bottom portion of your grip to the top of your rear sight or the top of your optic if you have one, and then divide those two numbers and it'll give you a percentage. So like for me, like I said, this gun is somewhere between 40 and 45% of my hip to hip distance. This is a concept called Concealment Percentages by Tessa Booth. She has a YouTube channel, Tessa Booth, TESSAH BOOTH. And she talks about the concealment percentage and when it's kind of easy mode and when it's hard mode and how to kind of navigate if the gun you have is too large for your concealment sweet spot. So just so you know, you might struggle if your gun is more than 45% or so of your concealment space that you have available to you. And this is particular to appendix carry, right? If you're carrying strong side, the dimension is going to be from the front of your hip bone to the back of your kind of spine area. That dimension versus the length of the grip is really going to be what is going to be the biggest impact on whether or not the back edge of the grip is printing through your clothes. Okay. So concealment percentage is a really good way to figure out if you're on easy mode or hard mode. But then from there, we want to figure out how to get better concealment. So we have two main tools available to us for concealment purposes. The first one is called a wing. So I'm going to try to show you guys on the camera. So this piece here is a wing. And the way that the wing works is by using belt tension. So if a belt were to go through these loops and across the top of this wing, as the belt gets tight, let me see if I can demonstrate this with a cloth or something. I'm going to pretend that this eyeglass cleaner cloth is a belt for this purpose. So let's pretend that that's in the loops and then this is the belt and it's over top of that wing. As the belt gets tightened, it's going to rotate the holster toward your body. So if the grip of the gun is sticking out here, right? We've got our gun in the holster, the grip is here. As you pull on that wing, it's going to rotate the grip into you. So if you're finding that your holster or that your gun is printing right here on the grip or the magazine area, you might benefit from a bigger wing. If you have a bigger wing with good belt tension, that is going to rotate the grip of the gun into your body like this. So if I stand sideways, you guys can see right now, I've got a little bit of a gap behind the gun on that grip side. If I added more of a wing inside the space plate, it will literally just push that grip into my body a little bit more, keeping the rest of the holster where it is. So it's just rotating the grip. So that's grip rotation. The other thing that we can do is get grip tuck. So grip tuck is more of this up and down direction. And one of the best ways to get grip tuck is through the use of a wedge. So this is an example of a wedge. It's basically just a piece of foam. There's all sorts of different shapes that you can get wedges in. I've got a circular one. I've got kind of this oblong one. You can get small ones, medium ones, big ones. Depending on your body type, you will need a different kind of wedge than I need. Most of the time, I need this size or smaller. Whereas someone who's larger than me and has more space that they need to fill behind the muzzle of the gun, they might need a bigger wedge than this. They sell wedges that are like pillows where you put in stuffing until it's the right size for you. So for example, I'm going to tilt this down so you can see a little bit better. For example, if I am having some gap here, the top portion of my gun is pushing out away from my body. How would I fill in that gap? I could use a wedge and I would Velcro it, right? I'd put some Velcro on it. I'd put some soft Velcro on the back side of my holster to let this stick to it properly. And I would put this as low on the bottom of the holster as I could get it. And what that does, I'll show you kind of both options. So that's with a wedge, without a wedge. Do you see how this just kind of popped out when I took it out? And when I put it in, it tucks that whole grip into my body. So that wedge is literally acting like a fulcrum. The more wedge I put underneath the muzzle of the gun, the more the grip of the gun will go in toward my body. This works also in conjunction with belt tension. So if you're not tightening the belt enough, the wedge won't seem like it's working. So make sure that you're getting good belt tension in order to see the positive effects of the wedge. So let's talk a little bit about wedge placement. Where do we want to put the wedge on our holster? So if I was going to use a little tiny wedge like this one, I would want to place it as low on the holster as I could get it. If I'm putting a wedge anywhere on the middle of the holster, all it's going to do is push the entire thing away from my body, and it's going to make all my printing worse, right? But if I put it at the very, very bottom of the holster, now it's going to push out the muzzle and push in the grip. So it's just going to tilt the gun in toward my body. Now, I will say that some girls will struggle with using wedges because they get below the belt printing. So if below the belt is your problem area, then you're not going to benefit from using wedges. But if you have a little extra space below the belt, you know, let's say that your jeans have a little bit of a looser fit, they're not super elastic, then a wedge is a really great way to eliminate that grip printing. So if I was having just kind of general top edge of my gun is printing, then I would want to put this in the center of my holster, right? As low down on the muzzle as I can, but centered on the left and right. If I was only having a problem with my rear sight, let's say this rear sight was just being pesky and it was always catching on my shirt and I could look down and see it, then I actually want to bias my wedge towards the other side of my gun. So if my rear sight is printing, I want to put the wedge over here. If the grip side is printing, I want to put the wedge towards the slide side because it's going to act in this kind of angle direction, right? If you push out here, it's going to push in here. I hope you guys can see that clearly. I'm trying to see myself on this little tiny screen over here, but hopefully you're kind of catching the point here. If you have grip side printing, put the wedge on the slide side of your holster. So how do you know what you need to do? There's a really nifty method for that I will show you guys. So this is called the poke and check method. So I will put my gun on, I'll get it into my valley like we talked about, looking at our landscape of our abdomen, figuring out where our valley is, and then getting good belt tension. So from here, I am going to put down my shirt and I'm just going to start looking for printing. Actually, I'm going to tuck this so that we're not distracted by the belt printing. Okay, so when I put my shirt down, that's actually concealing pretty well, but I can see some magazine well right here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I can see it very clearly when I look down at my body. I don't really see any rear sight printing. I'm not seeing any printing on the slide side of the gun, but I definitely am seeing this magazine well. This either needs to go in toward my body or I need to shift the position of my gun. But honestly, I feel like this is about the best spot for my gun to be. So I'm going to poke on the problem area. So I'm going to use my fingers and I'm going to poke on the problem and I'm going to see what else changes. So when I poke here, I very clearly see that this bottom corner lifts away from my body. So if I was able to fill in that gap and keep that pressure moving outward, that is going to tuck this in without me having to push on it. So this is called the poke and check method, right? You poke and you check to see what else changes, and then you try to fill in the gap. So for me, I'm going to start with this little one here on the very bottom on the slide side of the gun. And now I'm going to put my shirt back down and I'm going to see if that helped with my magazine well printing. So my magazine well is right here and it did help, but I still see it. So I'm going to take out the little one and I'm going to try a larger option. I'm going to put this larger one here. I'm going to stack it right behind that slide side of the gun. And I actually already see that this just went in quite a bit. So I'm going to show you guys that from the side. So when I pull it out, did you see that pop out there? And then I'm going to put it back in. Did you see how that came in nice and tight to my body? So we kind of already see it working. So now if you look, I'll do some movement. That printing is much better. When I'm looking straight down on my body, I'm not seeing kind of the obvious magazine area. When I look on the side, when I twist, I can still kind of see it poking. And that tells me that I probably want to try that bigger wing. I want to put a little bit more of a wing on it so that this is getting pushed rotationally into my body. So the wedge is going to help with tucking and the wing is going to help with rotating. So those are basically the main two tools that we have at our disposal when we are trying to get better concealment. And those tools will work with any kind of holster. It does not have to be the Enigma. It could be any sort of Kydex holster. This one actually has a wedge built into the Kydex so that you don't have to attach a wedge on the outside of it. But there's all sorts of different wedge sizes. You can actually try this at home by grabbing a sock, roll it up or fold it into a very small square and do the poke and check method yourself and use that sock to see if you might benefit from a wedge before you go, purchase a bunch of different options and try them out yourself. You can just DIY it at home. Filster Holsters has a YouTube channel that goes through a lot of different DIY solutions. They have a video from 2022 called Concealed Carry Comfort that has a bunch of tips about how to get more comfortable. And then there's a yoga block option where you just buy a yoga block and you chisel it into a wedge that's perfect for your body. And they have a DIY video on how to do that. So if you want to try things DIY instead of buying a bunch of different wedges and stuff, that's a great way to go. All right, I have some questions here. So have you ever had an instance when you knew someone saw your concealed gun? Yes, I actually have. This probably has happened a couple of times. I've had the case where a little kid that is in my life has run up and hugged me and bonked their head on the gun. And this particular little kid knows that I carry a gun. And so he went, ow, your gun, but we were in public. So even though people didn't see it, they knew that I was carrying a gun because the little kid said something. I've had other cases where I've accidentally shown my gun either through, like a movement or the wind. Sometimes when you go outside, the wind kind of acts as like, you know, saran wrap basically, right? It totally outlines your gun. And so as soon as you notice, you're like, oh, I should walk the other way where the wind isn't as strong or something like that. But yes, I definitely have had instances of that. I just try my best to mitigate them or minimize them as much as possible. Next question, which is more important, better concealment or fast access to a good grip? This is going to be very person dependent. If you are a law enforcement officer doing undercover work, where if you're found with a gun, it means that you must be a cop and they're going to kill you. I would say concealment is going to be that person's top priority, right? If you have a job that is a location where, let's forget about SB2 for a second. Let's say that the company says you can't carry a gun, but legally you can. Depending on how important that job is to you and how much you need that income, concealment might be your top priority there, right? So this is going to be very, very situation dependent. I would say for a lot of folks who are just living normal lives, who are carrying in places where it's legal, legally allowed to do so, where their job isn't at risk or things like that, probably they're going to want to have, both. They'll want good concealment, but also good access to a grip. I will say that there are lots of options out there for deep concealment. And when I use that term, I'm using it to mean the grip is at least partially below your waistband. I do deep conceal fairly regularly when I'm needing better concealment for any number of reasons. So when I am needing better concealment, I will sometimes use this method, but there are very specific ways to practice your draw to get good speed as well. So I use what's kind of coined by an instructor named Rhett Newmeyer. He has a YouTube channel called Demonstrated Concepts LLC, and his YouTube channel has a lot of information about deep concealment because that's his thing. He carries his gun very deep in his pants. That guy is a wizard. He has a sub-second draw from deep concealment. He's super speedy. I've seen it in person. He is crazy fast. Not everyone is going to get to that level in deep concealment, but he has videos that talk about how to draw quickly and how to set up your deep concealment situation so that you're getting the best access that you can. For me, when I'm deep concealing, I have the grip of the gun either halfway, so it would look basically like this, but the pants would be on the outside. I like to have the pants halfway over the grip, not all the way over, especially if there's elastic in the pants, because then it's very challenging to get your hand into the waistband. But if I just have, let's say I'm wearing gym shorts or something and it's covering the gun like this, my fabric of my gym pants or my shorts or whatnot is actually going to create a little triangle behind the grip of the gun that allows me to get my 3 fingers in. So I use kind of a stab method. So there's a question, what does it mean when you're in deep concealment? So when I say deep concealment, I mean that all or part of the grip is behind the waistband of your pants. So instead of having your waistband here, where the whole entire grip of the gun is above it, you have your waistband here or even, up here. So your pants are fully covering the gun. That would be deep concealment. When you are using a deep concealment method, if you are letting half of the grip stay exposed, so let's say, for example, that this pink piece of paper was my pants, right? If I had it like this, my pants are going to have this little spot back here behind the magazine where I can still access the gun. So even though the pants are touching me on the side here, I can stab 3 fingers into the pants and then slide over to get a good grip on the gun. And that's how I personally do it when I deep conceal. I leave about half the grip exposed. I stab behind the magazine and slide my fingers forward, and I can pretty consistently get a 1.3 or 1.4 draw to first shot using that deep concealment draw technique. When I tried the method of coming straight onto the grip, I did find it to be a little bit slower for me because I had a lot more kind of fumbles where I had to go back and try again to get access to the grip. But the approach from the back side of the grip for me has been very consistent, and I haven't had issues where I have to like go back and try again. So that was a long-winded way to answer the question, which is better, which is better concealment or fast access to a good grip? I'll just say it's person dependent, situation dependent. But if you do have to carry with your grip compromised, where you can't get a full grip on the gun outside of the pants, then there are some different ways to handle that. One other thing I'll mention is that if you have a deep concealment method where you can use your non-dominant hand to clear the garment, it's essentially, instead of having a shirt that you have to clear, it's essentially just having pants that you have to clear outward. So you use your left hand just like you would to clear your shirt. You grab your waistband, you pull it away from your body, and then you can get your hand in there to get to your gun, and you still have full access to the grip. So there's all sorts of methods and ways to do it. Someone asked, what's my dog's name and does he carry concealed? His name is Scout, and he does not generally carry a gun, but he does love treats. So he's a cutie pie. All right, another question we've got here. How do you suggest people respond if someone does notice their CCW? So this is going to be very situation dependent. If someone notices, like, let's say, for example, it's a stranger, and they say something casual, like, you know, I noticed your gun, you know, you're printing, or something like that. You probably know that's a gun person, right? If they're going to be casual. And so I would probably just kind of laugh it off and move on about my day. If it's a situation where it's like the person who's running the business or something like that, and they're uncomfortable, they might ask you to leave. And if someone ever asks you to leave, I would just comply right away, because staying is just going to create additional problems. The police might get called. Now it's a whole ordeal. You can shop there a different day, right? You can choose a different store to go to. So I would recommend, you know, being really mindful of how you respond, having some things, especially if you've got young kids, like the situation where the kid hit my gun with his head. Maybe having some things pre-planned, you know, so maybe letting your children know, hey, we don't mention, you know, mom or dad's gun when we're out in public. This is important for our safety. And so we're not going to mention that mom's carrying a gun. If the kid hits their head, maybe right away, I would start saying, oh, I'm so sorry, my belt buckle got you, or, you know, just start talking so the kid doesn't have time to blurt out what they might say about it being a gun or something like that. I have heard a lot of different things that people say about, you know, it's a medical device, or let's say a coworker notices and is like, hey, you know, what's that? You know, something along those lines, where they're kind of asking an open-ended question. I've heard people say, you know, you can say it's a colostomy bag, or you can say it's an insulin pump. I would just offer a word of hesitancy here. Anyone who knows anyone who has a colostomy bag, I know people in my life who do. I also know people in my life who have insulin pumps. They know that that is not what that looks like. So you can use those types of excuses if you want to make something up, but are you prepared to live with that excuse for the rest of your life, or as long as you know that friend, right? So if you're like, oh, it's my back brace. Now in 3 weeks, when that same person's like, how's your back doing? You're like, what do you mean? Like, my back's fine. You know, are you going to remember the lie? Are you going to play along every time? If you say it's an insulin pump, you know, are you going to decline the cake when they have a birthday party at the office? You know, or is someone going to say, hey, I thought you were a diabetic, you shouldn't have that? So just be mindful what types of excuses and lies you're using, and make sure that it's something you're comfortable sticking with, because it can get really uncomfortable really fast, especially if someone is like, wait, my sister has an ostomy bag. That's not what that looks like. It can get really uncomfortable. So I tend to shy away from the outright lies. I'll just have an excuse ready. Like if I am wearing a belt, I think, saying, oh, my belt buckle is bulky or something like that. But you also have the potential that they're like, oh, let me see. And then, your belt buckle actually isn't where the printing is. So I would just kind of I more lean toward saying, oh, like, I'm not sure, or, just kind of playing it off. Saying that it's private, I think is okay, because then that, their mind can kind of wander. They can come to any conclusion they want, say, oh, it's private. Most people aren't going to keep prying at that point. But to be really specific and say it's an insulin pump or it's a colostomy bag, just make sure that you are choosing something that actually looks like it could be a gun. Yeah, Mike Short said, I say my eyes are up here. I think that's a great one. Anything that adds a little humor, anything that allows you to kind of move along without getting stuck in that conversation is definitely helpful. So, all right, I think I've answered all the questions. We've talked about how to choose a safe holster, how to get good concealment. I hope that the wings and wedges conversation was helpful for you guys, and that you're kind of picturing how to choose where on your body is the best placement. I'll throw out a couple other recommendations for places that you guys can go. I'm going to share my screen here for a second so that you guys can see some options here. So the first thing we're going to look at is a really cool website called handgunhero.com. So Handgun Hero allows you to select any two handguns. Actually, you can do more than two, and compare their specs. So you can see their sizes, you can see their lengths, you can overlay them on top of each other and move them around. So I like using this if a friend is asking me, hey, I'm thinking about getting this gun. Do you think I'll be able to conceal it? You can go to Handgun Hero. You can choose two guns, you can compare them, and you can tell them, exactly which dimensions are different. You can talk to them about, the fact that the length of the grip and the width of the gun are the two important dimensions for concealment. We really don't care how long the barrel is. That almost never affects people's ability to comfortably conceal that firearm. But the length of the grip and the width of the gun are going to really matter for concealment. So if they're in between like a slimline Glock, like a 43X and a Glock 19, most people are going to have a better time concealing the 43X. So this is just a really nifty tool. You can line them up backwards. You can see the differences in width between different options. You can line them up on the sides. So I'm a huge fan of this tool. You can also use it to look at things like trigger reach. You can see, is the trigger further away on a particular gun than on another. So I think this website is super helpful. And then Filster Holsters has a whole portion called Learn. This goes through a lot of different topics. I'm going to just take you guys to this one, which is called Basics of Concealment Mechanics. That's the one that I really recommend. If you're struggling with concealment, you start with this. There's all sorts of pictures for different body types. You can kind of flip through these. Lots of different helpful graphics talking about things like wings and wedges, and just other tools that you can use to get good concealment. There's a whole principle called the Keel principle that is really helpful if you think that's the problem that you're struggling with. So there's a lot of helpful videos here: how to find your concealment sweet spot, how to place wedges, how to make your own wedge. This is the DIY one that I mentioned to you guys. So you can find all this by going to filsterholsters.com and then clicking on the Learn tab and going to Basics of Concealment Mechanics. So Filster is PHLSTER. But I highly recommend checking out some of their videos. They have a lot of good content on how to get more comfortable and more concealed. And then I did have one other resource I was going to share with you guys, and I'm forgetting what it was. We were talking about, oh, deep carry. I want to show the deep carry YouTube channel really quick to make sure that I said it correctly earlier. I believe it's Demonstrated Concepts LLC, but I just want to double check that. Yes, it is. Okay. Demonstrated Concepts LLC is a YouTube channel. And if you go to the search feature on the YouTube channel, you can search for deep concealment and you'll see all of his deep carry stuff. He uses an Enigma. I think sometimes he uses other holsters, but it'll kind of answer that question that someone was asking about getting good access to the grip. He goes through all sorts of considerations about how to make sure you're getting good access to the grip, even if the grip is below your waistband. So with that, I think I'm just gonna chat really quickly about two things that sometimes helps folks who are really struggling with comfort. So the first thing is some people just need a layer of fabric between the gun and their skin. Some people just do not have the skin tolerance to have a gun rubbing on their body all day, especially if the grip of your gun has kind of sandpapery texture. That can get really uncomfortable for people. So I would recommend using some sort of a liner layer between your gun and the skin if that is happening for you. For me, I really like getting, it sounds funny, but bandeau bras. They're like, the old fashioned tube tops. But instead of wearing them as a bra, I put them around my waist and then I put my gun on top of it. And that handles all of my friction issues without adding a whole nother tank top or a whole nother layer of fabric where now I feel kind of sweaty or that sort of thing throughout the day. So bandeau bras on Amazon, you can buy 4 of them for like 12 bucks. So that's a really cheap solution to give yourself that liner layer if you need it. And then another thing is belts. So when you're choosing a good belt for concealed carry, you want to make sure the belt isn't too stiff. You want it to be stiff enough to hold up the weight of the gun, especially if you're using like a holster attached to a belt with some sort of a clip system. You want the belt to be structured enough to hold up the gun, but you don't want it to be so structured that it's creating like a circle effect around your body. It's called like the hula hooping effect. You may have a belt where it's so inflexible that it's basically making you rounder than you are. And a lot of times those certain belts will actually pull the gun away from your body. So you want a belt that has a little bit of flexibility in it so that it'll tuck the gun into your body instead of pulling it away. And those are kind of two things that people complain to me about or ask about a lot is, why do I feel like I get better concealment when I use this nylon belt that's flexible versus this leather belt that's really stiff? And that's why. That's the kind of general concept behind it. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys learned a lot about concealment and hopefully how to get better concealment with your own gear. Like I said, if you have any questions or you want to, send me some pictures of your setup and have me give you some critiques, I'm happy to do that. You can find me on Facebook, Dakota Adelphia. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is Life with Adelphia. And then you can also email me at dakota@filsterholsters.com if you have any questions about filster products or concealment. I'm probably most likely to see your email if you email me there. If you go to girlinagun.org and find the San Diego chapter, you'll find my Girl in a Gun email address. If you have any questions about events that are coming up or classes that I'm hosting, anything like that, please feel free to reach out there. And then my work phone number is very available to find online, but I'll say it. You can text this number or you can call me 619-629-3344. So thank you so much for being a great audience and asking a bunch of good questions. Have a great night.